here tonight? I don't know. Is Nancy on right now?
Yeah,
Oh, there
I
you go.
just turned the recording on.
Thank you so much. Because I know there were some people who had like, some people do Sunday night family Zooms with their kids and so on. And I know some folks really wanted to attend and just couldn't tonight. So if we can record it, then I can make sure that you and I can work together to make sure that the recording's available.
We have a minion at least.
Pardon me, Vera?
We have a minion.
That's right, we have a minion.
We can start.
All right. Yeah, in the interest of not, I know, you know, Ted and Jennifer have both taken time out of very busy schedules. So we'll go ahead and get started. And if anyone joins us a little late, that's fine. And then folks who couldn't make it tonight, and I know there were several who mentioned to me they were really interested, but they have various family Zooms on Sunday evening. So we will have the recording available for them.
Okay.
So we're very, very pleased to have two expert speakers tonight on a really important topic that I think has been on a lot of our minds, which is getting our ducks in a row with estate planning and financial planning. And I will just do brief intros of our two speakers. One of them, many of you know, and that's Ted Froome, who's a member of Am Yisrael and a very experienced attorney who works in estate planning, tax, asset protection, transactional planning, trusts, and guardianships, premarital agreements, that whole area of law. Our other speaker tonight is Jennifer Aronson. And Jennifer has an MBA from the University of Chicago. She's a chartered financial analyst and very experienced financial planner, and the founder and managing partner of Mosaic Fi, which is in Lincolnshire. And she is an advocate for empowering women in all aspects of their financial lives. And we're just pleased as punch that that my brother-in-law made the connection for us with Jennifer because she's just a perfect speaker on the topic of financial planning and has a particular interest and focus in helping women with financial planning. So I'm gonna hand it off now. Ted will be speaking first and then Jennifer, and then we will have time to take some questions.
Thank you, Catherine, for those nice introductory words. So tonight, for 10 to 15 minutes, I'm going to be talking about estate planning, which is really death, taxes, and other fun topics like that. Because no one wants to look at me talk for the next 10 to 15 minutes and yammer on. I'm going to resort to a tried and true tactic of mediocre speakers everywhere, which is a PowerPoint. So Nancy, with that, if you could put up the first slide for me. Ooh, Nancy, are you there?
Yeah.
Disappeared. Okay, here we are. Hey, terrific. And you can go to the next page, please. All right, so what is estate planning? Well, essentially, it's figuring out how to get your stuff to loved ones and charities, such as Am Yisrael, in a way with less cost and hassle rather than more. People hear estate planning and sometimes they get a little anxious. They go, I don't have an estate. It just means getting your stuff from you to your loved ones in an efficient way. It can also mean figuring out certain elements for how to care for you if you can't make your decisions for your own care, for your assets, and for yourself while you're alive. Figuring out how to get guardians named for your kids if you pass away while they are minors. And finally, one last item about estate planning in candor. It's totally altruistic, all right? You do it all for somebody else. So what do you get? You get boring meetings with nerds, usually in ties or, you know, business suits of some kind, and you get a bill and somebody else gets the benefit. That's, you know, that's the truth. So some people don't really love the, you know, the process of it. And I could understand that because it's for somebody else. So Nancy, if you can go to the next slide, please. So when you go to an estate planning lawyer, you need not only tell the lawyer what you want to happen with your stuff, but you got to talk about what your stuff is, because not all stuff is the same. Different different items that you have different legal characteristics that drive how they go from you to your loved ones on your death. So you got to disclose what you have to a lawyer so they know which tool in their toolbox to use. Because again, not everything is the same. A while back, I had a very, very smart, super PhD, super smart college professor who had a few $1 million in a 401k. And he said, I want a will, and I want it to say this, that, and the other thing. And I kept saying, well, I could draft you the most beautiful will in the world. You could frame it, but it doesn't have any legal effect on what you have in that 401k. And it took a while to get him to understand that, that really not one tool is going to apply to all your assets. There are actually 4 different types of assets, 4 groups, and each requires a different estate planning tool so that it can go from you to your loved one. Nancy, could you go to the next slide, please? So as you can see here, the four categories are joint assets that are joint with rights to survivorship, assets that pass through beneficiary designations, those that are in trusts, and finally, the leftover stuff with some exceptions. Nancy, go to the next slide and I'll break it down for these nice folks. Category 1, joint property. Joint does not refer to either of these kinds of joints. What is joint property? My wife and I, let's say, I'm going to use her as an example with me. We own our house together. If I get hit by a truck, if we own our house joint with rights of survivorship, there are 2 owners, and then I pass away, she's just the sole owner. By operation of law, she owns the house. It's like this show Survivor that my kids love. The last person on the island wins. The last owner is going to come away with the joint property. So even if my name is still on the deed to the house or that joint bank account or whatever, that's just a clerical issue. My wife owns that property. You don't need to really take any action at all after somebody dies unless you want to clear up the titling on the account just as a paperwork issue. All right, next slide, please, Nancy. Category 2, anything that's passes via beneficiary designation. It's just a contract. So if you open up a retirement account or you have a life insurance policy, you name a beneficiary. So again, using myself as an example, I've got a life insurance policy, I've got a beneficiary designated retirement account. When I die, I will have filled out, hopefully, forms ahead of time that says, hey, Erin, my wife, you are the primary beneficiary. And when I die, she gets to go to the bank or the life insurance company and say, hey, Ted kicked the bucket. Here's his death certificate. I'm going to fill out some forms, and then she'll come away with a new set of accounts. That's all there is to it. You don't need any fancy legal mechanisms. Now, a little known fact, you can beneficiary designate more than life insurance and retirement accounts. You can do bank and brokerage accounts depending upon your particular institution. And in certain states with certain properties, you can even beneficiary designate real estate. The fancy word here in Illinois is transfer on death instrument, or TODI or TODI, as you can see. So you can beneficiary designate a lot of stuff, but that shouldn't be the main component of an estate plan. Nancy, could you go to the next slide, please? All right, the third way assets pass is anything owned in a trust passes according to the provisions of a trust. And all a trust is a legal bag. Here's a picture of a suitcase, right? This is made of, I don't know, leather or canvas or whatever. It's got a handle on it, right? Just like maybe your purse or your gym bag. A trust is just like that. It's just a vesicle that holds stuff. Somebody carries it and somebody owns the stuff inside. The person who carries the trust is called the trustee. They get to manage the bag. They could put stuff in, they could take stuff out, they could mix it around, do whatever they want. They're in charge of the bag. The person who benefits from what's in the bag is called the beneficiary. Now, very typically in a very common estate plan, if you have a trust, you get your own bag, you're carrying it around and all the stuff in it is for you. You can do whatever you want with that stuff when you're alive. It doesn't even have its own tax ID number. It just uses your social security number if you have an account in the trust. When you die, you name somebody else to carry the bag for you. A successor trustee is the fancy schmancy legal word. That successor trustee will look at your trust document and say, what do I do with this stuff in the quote unquote bag in the trust? They'll see the directions in the trust document and they've got legal authority to sign checks and deeds and things to make sure that your assets go wherever you've directed them. That's the third way. Nancy, could you go to the next slide, please? What's the fourth category? The leftover stuff. If you die owning things and they are not joint with rights to survivorship, they're not beneficiary designated, and they're not in a trust, it's just the leftover stuff. Your will controls where your leftover stuff goes. That's different than a trust. The will, we all know from like watching sitcoms what a will is. It's a piece of paper drafted in a certain way that says, I want my leftover stuff to go wherever. You say it in the will. If you don't have a will, there are certain background rules that our legislature has been kind enough to write for us, saying where our stuff goes, and it all depends on what your family looks like. A whole bunch of rules. We usually try to avoid that background default set of rules. That's called intestacy. There are two routes for your assets to go through if they're controlled by a will or by intestacy. One is through the probate courts, and the other is not through the probate courts. What determines it? Well, if any of your leftover stuff, is real estate, then it's got to go through that probate court system. If it's not real estate, but it's other stuff, stocks, bonds, Hummel figurines, whatever, and the aggregate value of all your tchotchkes in that category is over 100 grand, again, you need to get that court order from the probate court. Here in Cook County, where I practice, probate court is down in the Daly Center. Every county has their own version of that in the state of Illinois. And by Illinois law, probate is at least 6 months long. There's hearings at the beginning, there's hearings at the end. It could go way longer than 6 months, depending upon whatever happens in between. It's not private. People can and do go to the Daly Center and they pull the public records and they cross-reference them with land records to see if they can make a couple bucks. And generally, between the extra time, the lack of privacy, and the extra expense involved in going through probate, most estate lawyers will try to get their clients to set up their affairs so they avoid probate. And you do that by using other tools. You don't try to have too much in this leftover category. All right, Nancy, can you go to the next slide, please? So what are estate planning goals? Well, it's to use the proper tools with respect to the proper assets to get assets from a client to their loved ones after they pass away with less costs and hassle and time rather than more. And we try to avoid probate, and we try to reduce taxes where we can, if we can't avoid them entirely. Could you go to the next slide, please? Here's a sample estate plan for an average North Shore beneficiary or Chicago beneficiary, the people who I see in my office all the time. We combine the various tools. So some assets might be joint with rights to survivorship. Like if you have Mr. and Mrs. Sample come into the office, they might have a joint checking account for their household bills and some cars. And those are fine because we're going to try to squeeze the value of those under 100 grand. Some assets are beneficiary designated, like retirement accounts, and that's fine. There's really good income tax reasons to name your spouse as the primary beneficiary of your retirement accounts. Totally fine. What about the rest of your stuff? We try to use a will and trust combo. The trust is the main vehicle to get your assets from you to your loved ones. Anything in a trust, as I mentioned before, does not go through probate. So why do you need a will? The will's the backstop. So if in my example here, let's say Sid Sample, the client, he's got some assets that are not in trust, like his bank account and his car. The will scoops it all up and says, on his death, it goes to the trust. Then his trust will continue on for his wife, the lovely Mrs. Sample. Now, she's going to be, in my example, the successor trustee. So she's going to be able to manage whatever's in that trust. If it's drafted correctly, there'll be some tax benefits to that trust, estate tax-wise. And that trust could even be creditor protected. So if Mrs. Sample is maybe Dr. Sample, a famous OBGYN, those folks get sued every 18 seconds, then the assets in those trusts are going to be immune from creditors absent fraud or child support claims. Then under a typical estate plan, when Mrs. Sample passes away, whatever's left passes into 3 continuing trusts for whoever she wants. It could be for charity, it could be for kids, it could even be for her dogs. In my practice, I have drafted trusts for dogs, cats, horses, and once a lizard. It's true. For this, I went to law school. It's true. So this is a very typical estate plan structure that I see all the time. Could you go to the next slide, please, Nancy? So I've talked about death. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about taxes, the really exciting stuff. I know. Here's a couple of key quotes from both sides of the equation. Mark Twain, who did hate taxes, He was like the Jon Stewart of his day. And then FDR on the other side, he did acknowledge, hey, taxes are what we all have to pay if we don't want chaos. So Nancy, could you go to the next slide, please? So we've maybe heard in the press over the years something called estate taxes, or during the George Bush years, they started calling them death taxes as a political move. It's not a tax on death. It is a tax on what is considered excess wealth when a person dies. So essentially, in under 30 seconds, you can die with up to a certain amount of stuff. If you die with more than a threshold level of stuff, then there could be tax on what's over the threshold.
Right, but I felt bad, so I.
What's that? Oh, never mind. Sorry, I thought somebody was asking a question. Anything above the threshold could be taxed unless it goes to a spouse, and then the tax is deferred, or if it goes to a charity like Am Yisrael. In that case, if it goes to a charity, then no tax applies ever. So you could be worth $1 billion. If you leave $1 billion to a charity, there's no estate taxes on that. Now, anything over the threshold amount is going to have the tax rate applied under current law. This second, it's 40%. The estate tax on the federal level, as you can see, has a threshold of $11.58 million per person. May you all have such high-class problems to have to worry about that tax. Illinois estate tax, we're pobrecito. We don't have such a high exemption. We've got a $4 million exemption per person, and thankfully a lower estate tax rate. Now, there are all sorts of proposals, depending upon who you ask, about what to do with the federal estate taxes in these next few months. On the Republican side, driven by Donald Trump, and this is not a political statement, but he doesn't care if the exemption is 11.58 million or 5 million like it was a few years ago, or 3.5 million. To somebody who purportedly has the wealth that he has, that's all a rounding error. He wants the tax rate to be zero. Essentially, he wants the estate tax repealed. On the other side of the political aisle, there's a movement to bring the exemption down to where it was a few years ago, which was 5 million, or a few years before that, about $3.5 million per person. And what will happen in the future? I don't know. My crystal ball is pretty cloudy, and I think it's actually cracked. So I don't know where the tax is going to go. Illinois has no pending legislation of which I'm aware to change its estate tax. So who knows? We don't know. But what I do know is that for those folks who are a little concerned about the estate tax applying, it's really, really easy for most of us to plan around it, to either reduce it or avoid it entirely. Thankfully, for those of you who are trying to stay awake, I will not go into the weeds on that. So if we can go to the next slide, please. So I did see one person who had a young child in this when we were on the prior screen before, where I could see everybody's faces. Oh, Nancy, could you go back one slide? Here we go. So for those who have minor children, an estate plan is usually where you express your wishes about who you want the guardians for your children to be. It is usually embedded in the will, although you don't need to actually have it in the will. There's a statute in our Illinois law that says you can put it in a will-like document. It looks like a will, it smells like a will, walks like a will, but it's not a will. It has basically everything else gone. It's signed the same way with all the formalities, but it just has the guardianship provision. So most people say, why do I want to do that? I could just do my will. So you put it in the will. The guardian has to be a U.S. resident. So for those of you with family abroad, you can't say I want to, have my cousin in Tel Aviv or my brother in England. Can't do it. By Illinois law, the judges want jurisdiction over your guardians. They want to be able to send out beefy marshals to drag them into Cook County Court or Lake County Court if they're not doing their job. So you got to have a U.S. resident.
What?
The person has to be over 18 and can't be a felon. Maybe, sort of. The statute says you can't be a felon unless it's an old felony and the judge doesn't think it's too bad a felony, and then it can be a felon. Yeah, you read the statute, you're like, really? But that's really what it says. So the point
Ted,
of
I'm
that
sorry,
is,
Ted, I'm going to interrupt you for just a sec
Yeah.
to ask that all the listeners put themselves on mute because we are getting a little bit of background noise. So if everyone can just mute themselves except for Ted, thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. I wrote on this slide best interest standard, and that's really the standard that a judge uses, his or her best interest. So they take a look at whoever's named in the will, and they say, are you a resident? Are you over 18? Are you a felon? Let's talk about these things. I mean, you could name the most awesome person in the world, but if they walk into court drunk, screaming obscenities and wearing a tinfoil hat, the judge is going to say, well, you meet all the statutory standards, but you're not the right person. So the judge really gets to decide who you get to have appointed as the guardian for your minor children. By the way, there's two types of guardians: guardian of the person and guardian of the estate. Guardian of the person actually gets to house your child, kiss the boo-boo, sign the permission slips. Guardian of the estate manages money left to a child. Guardian of the estate is something that you can totally avoid simply by leaving money to your children in a trust. That's supervised outside the court, which means legal fees are a fraction of what they have to be if you do a court-appointed guardianship, where you got to go in front of the judge multiple times a year with a budget, with accountings. If you want to vary from the budget, you got to ask the judge in a motion that's written by the lawyer in an expensive process. So we try to avoid guardianships of the estate because there's a better way to do it. Again, you'll leave the money to your kid in a trust, which is outside of the court process. All right, Nancy, and if you could go to the second to last slide, and then mercifully I'll stop talking. Powers of attorney, part of the estate planning process. And this doesn't have to do with where your stuff goes when you're gone. It has to do with managing your stuff and managing your health care when you can't do it yourself because you're incapacitated in some way. There's two flavors, vanilla and chocolate. There's powers of attorney for property and powers of attorney for health care. Powers of attorney for property means essentially, look, you're appointing somebody, giving them the legal authority to act on your behalf with stuff that's not in a trust. Why not in a trust? Because you have a trustee who you named in that document who handles everything in that trust, in the bag. So using that silly analogy again, your agent under power of attorney for property handles all your stuff that's not in the bag. Your agent under power of attorney for healthcare, same kind of concept. You can't make your healthcare decisions, so you name somebody to have the legal authority to make those healthcare decisions for you. What if you don't have a power of attorney for healthcare? Then there's some background laws that say, look, it's called the Surrogacy Act. Here are some people in a set order who can make decisions for you: your spouse, your adult children, then siblings, then parents, and yada, 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 so on down the line. They can make some, but not all of your decisions. A power of attorney for healthcare really is a better vehicle because A, it's much more robust and inclusive than that background statute. And B, you get to name who you want rather than having the legislature decide the order of the people who will be your healthcare agents. All right, Nancy, could you go to that last slide? That's it, thank you. And you may wonder, why do I have Eric Matlin on the bottom of this? Because he and I both do the same things. You folks are all wonderful, and I see you at shul when I go, and hopefully I'll see you all when I'm back. Happy to answer questions. Eric is, I guess you would call a competitor, but he's also a great estate planning lawyer. And I called him ahead of time and before this, and I said, Eric, can I put your name on here for follow-up? His office is very close to the shul, a little closer to mine. He is a very good lawyer, very good estate planner, and that's his information. All right, that's it. Any questions, or have I tortured all of you people and put you all to sleep?
Ted, I think we'll have Jennifer go ahead and then we'll have Q&A at the end for both of you, if that's
Actually,
okay.
I've
Or
got
do
to
you have to get off?
Yeah,
Okay.
I had a family issue.
Oh, okay.
So if anybody has any questions, if not, you can always follow up with me via email or follow up with Eric, either one.
Ted, can you just spend a minute on the Yisrael Bequest program and explain?
I would love to. I would love to. So this is near and dear to my heart. I was involved with this committee for a few years. And I don't know if we're still partnered with the Federation on this, but Am Yisrael would be thrilled if folks could put a gift to the shul in their estate plan. And you can either do it through your will, if that's what you have, or if you have a trust. You can leave any amount for which the shul would be eternally grateful. you can leave that amount to the shul in your trust. You can do it through a beneficiary designated asset like a life insurance policy or a retirement account. And those are easily done because you just fill out a beneficiary designation form. So let's say you've got a $200,000 policy. You could just say Am Yisrael gets whatever, $10,000, $200,000, whatever. And other people are the other primary beneficiaries. The shul could certainly use your support. We've got a program where you fill out a letter of intent. Nancy can get you that form. And then after you've actually implemented the gift in your estate plan, just let Nancy know. It's discreet, it's private, nobody has to know. I've done it in my estate plan, and hopefully you'll do it in yours as well.
Can I just add that you do not have to indicate when you tell us that you're including us, you do not have to indicate the amount. So it really is very private.
Nancy, are we still hooked into that Federation program where there were matching gifts?
We are not.
We are not. We went through that program. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It looks like Vera has a question. Vera, make sure you unmute.
Yeah. When you include Am Yisrael, do you have to give some ID number of Am Yisrael or just by name?
Are you talking about in your estate plan or in the paperwork for Am Yisrael?
No. In the estate plan. Whether you do it in an IRA account or in a trust account.
If you do it through your trust or your will, you don't need any kind of tax ID number. If you leave it through a retirement account or life insurance policy, then the beneficiary designation form will probably ask you not only for the shul's name, but the address and probably the tax ID number, which Nancy can get for you.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Anybody else, or shall I let you nice people go? We'll go from death to lifetime planning. Jennifer, it's all you.
Ted, thank you so much.
Ted.
Thanks, everybody. Be well. Nice to see your faces.
Okay. All right. So I will get started. Well, again, since I don't know many of you, my name is Jennifer Aronson. I'm the founder of Mosaic FI. And okay. So thank you for joining us tonight. I'm very excited to be here. This really is a topic that we're discussing tonight is very near and dear to me. And in fact, part of the reason I started my firm about 7 years ago, working with women to empower them to make good financial decisions, which in turn allows them to make good life decisions, really is the mission of Mosaic FI. As a woman in the investment industry for over 25 years, I have seen how women are treated differently and are not encouraged to take ownership of their financial lives. As a single mother of 3 daughters who happens to love the investing world, I refuse to accept that dogma. A little bit about me, Catherine mentioned a few things, but I began my career at Northern Trust in their investment management group. I moved to a firm, Brinson Partners, for a few years, and then back to Northern Trust for several years. I then went to go work for a single family office, which is an ultra high net worth family or several families, advising them on investing and other financial related matters. And then about 7 years ago, I realized I really wanted to just make a difference in people's lives, which is when I began Mosaic FI as a registered investment advisor. I have my Bachelor's of Science from University of Arizona and my MBA from University of Chicago. As Catherine mentioned, I'm a chartered financial analyst or CFA and just finished a 3-year term as a director on the board of the CFA Society of Chicago. So now let's get started. So why is financial planning important for women? Well, basically, we need to do more with less. Women are 3 times more likely than men to leave the workforce to care for a loved one. And when we do work, we tend to earn less than men. On average, we earn 81% of what men earn for the same job. And we tend to live longer. We are, on average, we live 5 years longer than men. So as I said, we have to figure out how to do more with less. So what this really means is we need to be smart about our financial lives. Now, what gets in the way of financial planning for women? You know, ideally, women are partnering with their spouses and to make financial decisions. However, culturally, many women are conditioned to not feel that they're not good at making these decisions, and oftentimes women are just not invited to the table. I'm sure many of us have experienced, you know, sitting down with your husband and an advisor and, you know, the conversation being directed towards the husband. You know, this is very common. You know, women are just not encouraged to make big financial decisions. We may be responsible for paying the bills or, you know, deciding how the money is spent at the store or shopping, but the bigger picture decisions just tend to be made by the husband. And part of this is, you know, financial literacy. Women just do not receive a financial education in school or at home. And a lot of this has to do with fear. I mean, there's a lot of fear for everyone around money, and you know, making those big decisions feels uncomfortable. So, you know, if we want to shy away from it, you know, it's a little bit easier for women. So, you know, and some of that fear has to do with, I just don't want to know. I want to stick my head in the sand. I don't understand money, and so I don't want to look bad. That goes back to the financial literacy. I don't want to upset my husband. He normally handles that stuff, and so I don't want to make him feel uncomfortable about it. Or I know, or at least I think I know, I'm not doing well, and I may have to make hard choices in my life, and nobody wants to make hard choices. So what can you expect from a financial plan? Well, a financial plan should be goals-based planning. It should be customized to your unique set of circumstances, looking at all the facets of your life that's unique to you and what your goals, and be based on what your goals and objectives are. So it could be related to buying a new home. It could be related to wanting to downsize or, you know, move out of state. It could be planning for your children's education or your grandchildren's education, or it could just be related to, you know, figuring out exactly how and when you're going to retire. The second component is related to tax guidance. So, you know, we all have to pay taxes, but a financial plan should allow you to optimize your situation and therefore minimize how much you have to pay in taxes. And then there's the risk management component. So it can be related to your investment portfolio. Is it positioned to be able to handle market volatility and unforeseen circumstances? This could be related to insurance planning, making sure that you have the right insurance, that you don't have too much or too little insurance. And all of this is sort of related to planning for unforeseen issues, which, as we all know, always pop up. And then finally is the charitable and legacy planning, kind of along the lines of what Ted just talked about, but making sure that, you know, that any gifting that you want to do, whether it's while you're alive or as a part of your legacy, ensuring that all of that is being factored into your, you know, your retirement plan, or again, working with someone like Ted to work on your estate plan. And then of course, you know, a financial plan should really be your roadmap for retirement. So, you know, we spend a quarter to a third of our lives in retirement. I mean, that's a long time, you know, and in retirement, we're basically self-funding our lifestyle for 20 to 30 years. And, you know, mistakes in retirement or preparing for retirement can be very expensive. Some of the biggest blunders that people make in retirement is not starting to plan early enough and, you know, getting yourself into trouble early on and having to make bigger sacrifices later on. It could be related to spending too much because you just don't know what, you know, what you can afford and what you can do with the assets that you have. It could be related to not working long enough, or taking Social Security too soon or too late, taking distributions from your retirement accounts, again, too soon or perhaps even too late. So what are some of the things that a financial plan can help you think through? I mean, you know, a lot of people think of retirement as that, you know, that magical day that comes and, you know, and then that's the, you know, the kind of the final chapter of your life. But in fact, you know, retirement, there are many phases to retirement. You know, there's, and with that comes a lot of decisions that have to be made either a few years before or a few years after you actually retire. And so some of those issues that a financial plan should help you with is, you know, when to take Social Security. How do I create income from my assets? Where is my income coming from? What are the different sources of income that I have? And ensuring that you have enough income to support your lifestyle. What investment strategy should I have that will support my lifestyle, you know, be appropriate for my risk tolerance? And my need for income. And then when to retire. So are you, you know, do I want to work in retirement? Do I not want to work? Do I have to work? All of those are decisions that a financial plan can help you make. And then there's managing taxes. Again, you know, we all have to pay taxes, but optimizing your situation so that you're paying as little taxes as possible is certainly a goal of a financial plan. And then all of your healthcare related issues through retirement. So now we're going to just hop and take a look at a little quick case study, Joanna and Frank. So Joanna is 59 and Frank is 61, and they have current income of 175,000. So their goals for retirement are that they want to retire at 67 and they want retirement income of 175,000. They've got portfolio assets of about 2.4 million. They have a home worth 850,000 with a mortgage of about 426,000. They've got a second home worth 350,000 with no mortgage. And some of the assumptions that we're making for Frank and Joanna are each are taking Social Security at their full retirement age. They've got a 4% assumed rate of return on their investment portfolio. They have a 2% assumed rate of inflation and a life expectancy of age 90. So now I am going to hop to another screen. Wait 1 second. Okay. Does everyone see kind of a chart on the screen? Okay. Okay, so here is Frank and Joanna. So as we talked about, they have about 2.5 million saved up for their retirement. And they'd like to retire at 67, and they would like to spend about $175,000 a year. Well, we can quickly see that their assets get depleted fairly quickly. And in fact, you can see down here that their assets are only expected to last them until they're 81 years old. So given their the assumptions we made and how they would like to live in their retirement and when they would like to retire, this is not a workable retirement plan. So over here on the left, you can see we have a few levers that we can pull and a few factors in their retirement that we can try to work with them to make adjustments so that they won't outlive their assets. So the first option is maybe Frank and Joanna can retire 2 years later. What will that do for their situation? Well, you can see it extends their assets a couple of more years, but that's just not going to get them to a comfort zone for their retirement. So maybe they can reduce their living expenses in retirement by $25,000 a year. And we can see that also helps, but that cushion is just not enough to give us comfort that this is a viable retirement plan for them. So, and after talking to Frank and Joanna says, you know what, I want to retire at 67. I just cannot see myself lasting 2 more years. So we need to take that off the table anyway. So now we are back to trying to come up with an alternative solution. So, well, we can perhaps sell the vacation house in the next few years, which would then help them reduce their living expenses. And as you can see, this is definitely, and they would basically take those assets and use them to invest and partially fund their retirement. And as you can see, this puts them in a much more comfortable place. They certainly don't expect to outlive their assets. And this certainly becomes a viable plan for them. We can probably list another 5 or 10 factors in Frank and Joanna's life that we could play around with to come up with a solution. And obviously this is Frank and Joanna's situation, but each and every one of us has our own unique set of circumstances that we're dealing with. And again, that's what a financial plan should be about. It should be about what is unique to your situation. So now we can go back. So where do I start? Well, first of all, it's, sitting in on webinars like this, taking ownership of your situation and understanding that your success is ultimately determined by the choices that you make. And then it's about finding a credentialed and experienced advisor, but not just that, you should really find an advisor who fits your style. Just because your neighbor or your cousin or your brother has an advisor that they're crazy about, it might not mean that it's a good fit for you. And really with an advisor, you should feel that they understand you, they get your situation, and most importantly, that you feel comfortable asking questions. A lot of people feel like, well, I don't really understand this stuff, so I'm embarrassed that I have a stupid question. And you should never feel that way. And when the advisor is the right fit for you, you'll feel comfortable, asking whatever questions you have. And then you want to spend time envisioning, you know, what you want your retirement lifestyle to be like, to look like, and what you want for yourself, and where you're willing to compromise and where you're not. As we saw with Frank and Joanna, Joanna said, I'm retiring at 67, and that is not an option to adjust that. And then, you know, a financial plan is not a one and done. You don't just, you know, create the plan and then that's it. I mean, as we all know, life happens, and you should be able to review your financial plan whenever changes occur. You know, and that could be related to your health, employment, tax reform, as Ted alluded to. You know, we're looking at a period where we could be seeing a lot of changes with regard to tax reform, and you should be able to review your financial plan to ensure that, you know, you're optimizing your situation for whatever those changes might be. And then finally, know that there is an important relationship between a financial plan and an investment strategy. Those really should go hand in hand, and your financial plan should feed into what your investment strategy is. And you know, that's very important. And anybody who invests your assets without understanding your situation is really not doing you a good service. So what are the benefits of good planning and investing? Well, we're more likely to attain our financial and life goals. We're more prepared for uncertainties that invariably come our way. We have peace of mind. We gain knowledge, and with knowledge is empowerment. And when we feel empowered, we make well thought out life decisions. And we're a good role model for our children. So in summary, take responsibility to get your financial house in order. Engage with a credentialed and experienced advisor that fits well for you. Be honest with your advisor and with yourself about your situation, your goals. There should be no judgment, either self or otherwise. Be disciplined about savings, live within your means. You should be reviewing your plan at least annually, if not more, or whenever changes occur. And speak up if you don't understand or have concerns. So that's my part of the presentation. I would be happy to answer any questions, or anybody is, here's my contact information if anyone would like to reach out to me. And I'll turn it back to you, Catherine, if anyone has questions.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. And I will, if you have a question, if you could raise your hand, that would be really helpful. I can't see everybody in one screen right now. I have to kind of bounce around, but I'll do my best. I have one question to kick it off, and then Vera, I see you have your hand up. And my question is, you know, a lot of folks now are living into their 80s and 90s, yet we're in an environment of really low interest rates. So, you know, a lot of safer methods of saving just aren't really very attractive right now. But I know a lot of us, as we get older, don't really want to take a lot of risks either. So how, as a financial planner, do you address that?
Yeah, I mean, it is without a doubt, we're looking at some challenging times in terms of, you know, how do we live off of that income producing part of our portfolio? And you know, there's no easy answer. I have a lot of clients that say, well, I've got all this cash sitting here, and I would love to, you know, is there anything I can put that's risk-free, you know, anywhere I can put it? And the reality is, you know, there's no easy answer, but it's very important. And then there's the temptation to say, well, you know, I'm not earning anything on my fixed income portion of my portfolio. So, you know, I'll just hope for the best and put the assets in stocks. And the reality is that we, you know, the bond portion of our portfolio serves a few purposes. And one of them is hopefully to be income producing. The other one is though that protection, that preservation of capital. And we have to remember that that is just as important, if not more important, than the income producing component. But that's why, again, I do think that, and I go through this exercise many times with clients who get uncomfortable, like, oh, my income is going down. Am I going to be okay if I have to dip into some of my capital, you know, you know, fund my lifestyle? And that's why a financial plan is so helpful, because we can still go through the exercise of kind of like what we did with Frank and Joanna, and show clients that, okay, right now your income might be lower than you'd like or expected, but you're still going to be okay. So even if we need to dip into some of the capital, you know, over the next few years, until interest rates start going up at some point, you're still going to be okay. And that's why it's reassuring for people to see that.
Okay, thank you. Vera, if you want to go ahead and unmute.
Yeah. Jennifer, we lived there for a long time. I lived under impression, or under, like, the rule of thumb is if you take 4% of your portfolio, then you can preserve your capital for wherever. Okay, is it still true, or is it because I think I'm reading some kind of there's some new thoughts on the subject.
I mean, that is still the general school of thought, or rule of thumb, I should say, that that if you don't take more than 4%, and it's not so much that, not necessarily that you're going to preserve all your capital, but that you're not going to outlive your assets. So, you know, and I will say, back to Catherine's point today, you know, in today's environment, you know, you're going to have to expect that your portfolio is going to generate less income. And so you might be needing to dip into some of your capital. But, you know, again, there's always different sides of different perspectives when it comes to kind of some of these rules of thumb. But I would say it still is a good benchmark to tell you whether you're spending way too much or not, you know, or you should be able to spend more if you're so inclined. So again, that's why a financial plan is so helpful, because that shows you kind of where your margin of error is. And so again, though, I think it's, you know, there's also a lot of people talking about how, you know, the 60-40 model, 60% stocks, 40% bonds is no longer relevant, and that you shouldn't be putting that 40% in bonds. And then you read further into what they suggest, like, you know, Chinese government bonds, or the, you know, the different currencies, the yen, or, you know, gold. And the reality is all of those different options are extremely volatile and are not going to be that preservation of assets that you want from the safety side of your portfolio.
But history is saying that stocks always win on the big run. Okay, so 40% bonds, I mean, what do you earn? Nothing right now.
Well, it depends though. I mean, we could also, it depends on when, and again, just like Frank and Joanna, everyone has a unique set of circumstances. So if you don't need to touch your investment portfolio and you don't need those assets to live off of, then yeah, the stocks always win. But if you're going to need to take money out throughout your retirement and stocks are down for 5 or 10 years, which they very well could be, what kind of position does that put you in if you're having to sell your stocks as they continue to go down and you kind of have a double whammy to your your nest egg?
Thank you. Thank you.
Barbara?
Barbara, why don't you go ahead, and then Adrian.
Thank you. This has been such an enlightening presentation. My question is about the assumptions that you have to apparently make in order to devise a financial plan for anyone. And I wonder how, it's hard enough to make assumptions even about things where you have some knowledge, like, oh, I know my parents were very long-lived, so it's likely I will be too. But how about things that are so unknown at this point, like the availability and cost of health insurance, possible catastrophic events? I mean, is the only way to deal with that after the fact by a review of what happened, or can you do it in the expectation part?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, first of all, we only know what we know today. And and your question goes exactly to my point about that a plan is not one and done. You have this picture of your situation and then you're set for the next 30 years. That's something that should be reviewed frequently. And so over time, if the assumptions turn out to not be accurate and healthcare is more expensive than you thought, that should be reviewed. And so it's very much a marathon, not a sprint when you're working on a financial plan. So let's get you from point A to point B. We'll reevaluate at point B. And then at that point, if we need to make some adjustments to your situation, then we'll make those adjustments and we'll project forward. The goal is to, not start at point A and then, we haven't done anything, we haven't made adjustments, and then 10 years down the road, the client is in a much more challenging situation because we didn't make adjustments along the way. So that's why, and when I also think it's important to make conservative assumptions from the starting point. So let's assume expenses are going to be higher than what we really think they're going to be. Let's assume that the rate of return is lower than what we really think it's going to be. So by making all of those assumptions more conservative, it gives you a nice margin for error.
And are some of those assumptions different depending upon who your client is?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so if if we're working with somebody who has bigger plans and wants to own different homes, and we'll kind of assume that, or wants to do a lot of traveling, we'll probably make their expenses higher than perhaps somebody who just is kind of settled in their life and there's not a lot of unknowns. So, I mean, in terms of inflation or life expectancy, some clients say, I don't even want to project out past, whatever age. And so that's a choice they make. I mean, I'm still behind the scenes making my own assumptions and making sure they're okay. But so it partly depends also on what the client knows about themselves too.
Thank you.
Adrian, did you have?
Yeah, this is
this year they said they suspended the requirement of having to take the RMD.
Yeah.
Will they reinstate it next year?
I believe the expectation is definitely that they will reinstate it next year. So, yeah, so this was a definitely, obviously a very unusual situation, an unusual year to say the least. The fact that they did all the things that they did when with regards to retirement accounts is, yeah, was to me, I was actually surprised that they were as generous as they were with that.
Jennifer, I think something a lot of us worry about is what if we need assisted living or other more sort of intensive, levels of care as we grow older, and will that completely drain our savings and we won't have anything left to give to our children, et cetera. And I assume that's part of financial planning as well.
Absolutely, absolutely. I mean, it's hard because there's long-term care insurance is kind of a tough topic because it's very expensive, depending on when you get it. And, if somebody decides to get it now, depending on their age, they're not getting nearly the insurance policy that were available 10, 15 years when the product first came out. So that's, that's a tough decision to make, because if you decide to move forward with it, it's just a big investment. And it's an investment that has a lot of, has the potential for really kind of turning against you at the worst time. So premiums can go up at a time when you're more likely to need it. So I try to gauge where a client is at in terms of wanting that kind of protection. Now, so for somebody your age, I strongly encourage, if you can have a HSA account available to you, to fully fund that, and if you're able to not take the funds out. And so I have more and more clients who are putting money into HSAs and just letting those grow as an alternative to long-term care insurance if they don't want to spend the money.
Cheryl.
I've listened to different kinds of seminars like this, and I have, I'm self-employed. So I don't have an income that is a steady income throughout the year to make it much easier to budget.
Mm-hmm.
So planning for me is really difficult.
Mm-hmm.
And in any of these kinds of seminars, I've not come across anybody who talks about what do you do in a case like mine. If cash flow is slow, then I end up having to use a credit card, and then I've got that on my head. And then, when cash flow improves, then I'm just busy paying down the card. So any thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no easy answer. I mean, I usually recommend with, whether it's, while your working years or in retirement, that you, first of all, understand your budget, understand, what you need to live on, what's your discretionary and what are your non-discretionary expenses, and have an understanding of that. And then to sort of, create your own paycheck. So, if you have flush months where you're getting in more than what you need to spend, have that in a separate account, and then pay yourself whatever it is if it's $5,000 a month, transfer that 5,000 into your checking account each month so that you're sort of creating that structure. I understand now, it sounds like you keep kind of chasing your tail.
Yeah, I pay myself as it comes in.
Right. But I think, if you should get to that point where you're all caught up, instead of all the money coming into your checking account where it makes you a little more comfortable that you can spend and do more, having a second account that sort of pays you is a way to kind of keep yourself more disciplined in how you're spending. But no, there's no easy answers, I know.
Yeah, that's not in my control. So.
Right, yeah.
Hey, Barbara, I think you had another question?
Yes, I do. Are you a fiduciary with respect to your clients?
I am, absolutely, yes. As a registered investment advisor, you can only be a fiduciary, and that was a very important decision for me, that, of course, putting my client's interests first is most important.
I don't think I see any other hands up. If I missed anyone, I hope not. But Jennifer, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to give us an overview of financial planning and what the benefits are. We really, really appreciate it.
Oh, it's my pleasure.
I think you mentioned you had a financial planning checklist that you were going to pass.
Yes, I will send you an email with a couple of links, one with the presentation and then one with a financial planning checklist that you can distribute to everybody.
Great. We'll be happy to share it with everyone who was on tonight and everybody who's in the Synagogue's Women's Network.
Perfect.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let's get rich.
Let's not outlive our money. Let the money just move with us.
Vera, that's called Russian financial planning.
And you know what? Our kids can do it for themselves. I paid for 2 educations for my daughter. I'm done.
Yeah, and then we'll move in with them.
Isn't that where we started the evening off about the families moving together?
I think we came full circle.
And I took care of my mother too. Thank you so much.
Okay, good night, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.